I said, we're doing a musical called Springtime for Hitler. Tell him that. He said, I can't tell him that. I said, you tell him that. We're doing Springtime for Hitler.
Evening, everybody. Welcome to Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. I am pleased to introduce to you the legendary Mel Brooks, one of the greatest, comedy filmmakers of all, but honestly, one of the most acclaimed filmmakers of all time. I think Mel Brooks' career is kind of a lesson on taking the right path in comedy or entertainment in general. Would you consider yourself a Mel Brooks fan, Craig?
I like things that he's done.
There are people that say I'm a diehard Mel Brooks fan, but I feel like the most common answer is like, yeah, I like his best stuff. Like, not a lot of guys win Academy Awards for comedy, and he's a true EGOT winner. Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. Mel Brooks genuinely won all four of those for things he created. He had the pretty much a stereotypical comedy childhood. His father passed away when he was very young, born on the coffee table of tenement housing. I knew that tenement housing was obviously very poor housing, and it's a single family house that multiple families live in. Actually, a lot of the rooms were windowless and very tight. Section 8 to the 10 millionth degree, essentially, is what tenement housing sounds like. So that's how he grew up, without a father, single mother, and he kind of gives a reason that you'll hear a lot of comedians give. You kind of had to either be tough or funny. And so that's what Mel Brooks talks about here. He did an interview with Playboy back in the day that got very deep into his life. That's what this excerpt is from.
During the interview, he talked about the intimacy of male relationships in his movie Blazing Saddles. As he explained, I can't tell you what sadness, what pain it is to me never to have known my own father. If only I could look at him, touch his face, see if he had eyebrows. Maybe in having the male characters in my movies find each other, I'm expressing the longing I feel to find my father and be close to him. In that 1975 Playboy interview, Brooks also revealed that he and most of the other Jewish kids in his neighborhood didn't swim because they would get picked on by other kids. If they did go to the pool, they had to travel in packs to protect themselves. Even in his predominantly Jewish neighborhood, he was, in his own words, scrawny, but he found another way to make himself valuable. As he put it, why should they let this puny kid hang out with them? I gave them a reason. I became their jester. Also, they were afraid of my tongue. I had it sharpened and I'd stick it in their eye.
I feel like you hear that from a lot of comedians, is they kind of built a sense of humor as like a shield, essentially. I got to figure out a way to not get picked on. Maybe I'll just use my words. It's an interesting insight into parenting, because it almost makes you think like, maybe I shouldn't be too good to my kids, you know? I could create a great filmmaker if I just abandoned this kid now, you know? The type of lives they led and genuinely lived back then is so different than what anyone in entertainment now deals with growing up. Mel Brooks, another guy that served in World War II, was really unlike a lot of our characters. Mel Brooks was like a genuine patriot. He talks a little bit about that here.
You fought in World War II. You served.
I was.
Did you see it? Did you see any action?
A little.
Action?
I was short. I lived.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's good.
they shoot over you.
They shoot over you. Yeah.
Listen, the Army sent me to the Army Specialized Training Program. Sent me to VMI. When I was 17, when I was 18, I was in the regular Army, and at VMI I had studied electrical engineering, cosines, tangents, slide rules. I did. And the Army said, well, since he studied engineering, we'll put him in the combat engineers. So they did. And what do? You take a bayonet and you look for mines, planted mines. And they could blow up a tank. I mean, they're big, they're telemines. And
Your job was to try and find with bayonets?
Just you find them and unearth them and take them, really that was part of the combat engineer's job. And if it could blow up a tank, I mean, it could certainly take away a Jew in no time.
I thought that was a good line. So Hitler was none too keen on the Jews, and Mel Brooks said, this guy's got to be stopped. When he served, he was not aware of the concentration camps, or at least like the extent to which they went and things like that. Like, a lot of that wasn't found out until years later. And he's like very proud of his service and talks about how he still has his, his military fatigues and all of that, a genuine American. And that really influenced his career because there's a real theme of Hitler's stuff, as well as just history in general. Blazing Saddles is a Western, a history of the world. When we talk about these old guys, they just wanted to be entertainers. They didn't really know how to accomplish that. So they had to be song and dance men or, spin plates and juggle or whatever the fuck they had to do to get onto a stage. So Mel Brooks is interested in music, and that started with him being a drummer. One night, he had to replace a comic. The comic got sick, and they were like, can anyone fill in for him? And he's like, well, I remember his jokes. And so he just went on stage and repeated this guy's act. Later, he would do impressions. By the way, side note, one thing he mentioned that I found interesting, and he's like, obviously, you only perform there in the spring and summer. And I was like, oh, that's right. It's in the Northeast, so it's like a seasonal business. So comedy at one point essentially was seasonal.
Yeah, I can't laugh right now. It's too cold.
If he was dedicated to stand-up, if he said, I have to be a stand-up comedian, we may not even know who Mel Brooks is because he chose the right path, in my opinion. He's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and his movies still hold up today. Like, they're discussed today. Basically, he always knew, he says, that he wanted to be in entertainment, and that I do believe, but you can tell he's an entertainer. Like, he's very on. He's always performing. Mel is a guy that what I have learned, Brooks' career is a lesson in persistence. Basically, he would hang around guys like Sid Caesar, who was one of his biggest influences. Like, these guys would be at certain clubs and things, and Mel didn't necessarily have a reason to be there, but he would make sure he was there to kind of build a relationship with these guys. One day, Sid Caesar was like, all right, do you want to jump?
Hitler.
Yeah, so like I said, Hitler largely influenced his career, and he talks about that a little bit.
One day, the commissary was crowded. We only had 20 minutes to eat. I took my general step. We're dressed up. I swear, I'm not making this up. Let me see. I want to get my comb so I can prove it. Yes. This proves it. I went out like this, as Hitler. I went out as Hitler with my mustache and my hat, my uniform. All of us, the Nazi general staff, we went to the Apple Pan Deli on Pico Boulevard to have an Apple Pan Deli. Well, you never saw a service like that in your life. They were. Normally, can I get you anything else, Mr. Hitler? More water, Mr. Hitler? I mean, we were in and out of there in about 10 seconds.
Can I get you anything else, Mr. Hitler? He fits better as an old man for some reason.
Yeah, he was built to be an old man.
He said he was more fascinated, and like he talked about there, the power and how one man could influence that great a scope of the world. Let's move on from Hitler into some lighter stuff here. Here's one thing I liked. But Mel Brooks built like genuine, very long-lasting friendships. And Carl Reiner is probably the most prominent of those. But Sid Caesar, he was friends with until he died. Anne Bancroft, he was with for 40 years, I think, until she died. But the nice thing about old Hollywood and why people like going back to watch, old Carsons and the Dean Martin roasts and shit like that is because you got the vibe that it was a tight-knit community. Now that doesn't exist just because of the internet, essentially. I mean, The Rock and Leo have certainly never been in a movie together. I don't know if they hang out a lot. So one of the things he's most known for, but this is Carl Reiner talking about them coming up with the 2,000-year-old man bit.
When he was about 21 years old, I was about 25, he was a friend of Sid Caesar's, not working on the show, and he came to visit once, and the first day I was there, this man stands up and he starts to say he was a Jewish pirate, and I'll never forget the first lines. He says, I can't afford to set sail. He says, that they're charging for sailcloth $4 a yard. I can't afford to pillage and rape anymore. The first words I heard from him. And the following day I came in, there was a program called We the People Speak. I said to Mel, you knew Jesus? He says, thin lad, all right? Came into the store all the time, asked for water. I gave it to him. They were nice guys, never bought anything. And then for the next 10 years at parties, when it was dull anywhere, we'd get up and do it. And
that's such a great detail. Yeah, they never bought anything.
So, an older Jewish guy, but the bit is that he's 2,000 years old. So he's talking about Jesus and the crucifixion. A lot of these bits that we've talked about where it comes from like a nugget of an idea that these guys would do at parties. And all I can think of when he's telling that story, just because I guess we grew up in a very different era, how hard I would be rolling my eyes. Look at these two douchebags.
I know.
Meanwhile, they're two of the greatest comic minds who ever lived. These guys ended up working on Your Show of Shows, which it was Sid Caesar's show. And he hired Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Neil Simon. Neil Simon's brother, Danny Simon, also wrote on that show, Your Show of Shows. Maron told him this story where he goes, hey, I went to a writing class that was taught by Danny Simon. Mel's like, oh, no kidding. And he goes, yeah, he was a very bitter guy. And he kept telling us basically how he taught his brother everything he knows. And Mel just goes, yeah, he was always like that. It's not true. We didn't teach him anything. I love when those guys get to a certain age, they're like, I don't give a fuck.
What do I got to lose?
If you have one good friend, you're lucky. And I have one good friend. I call him my best friend. My life is fuller because I've had Mel in my life. If he doesn't come over, I don't know what to do with myself. He comes over every night. We love movies, and we said any movie that has 3 or 4 lines in it, and we hear those, we know we're in for a good time. The lines are lock all the doors, secure the perimeter, and let nobody in and out, and get some rest. He became an entity, and that entity wrote some of the best and most memorable movies of all times. I mean, to this day, farting is okay because he wrote a movie called Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, that is a thing. Like, that you can kind of credit Mel Brooks for is a lot of the silliness. It's very, very common now. Before that, you wouldn't get stuff like that. Like, there wouldn't be crass humor. And Mel's not the only one that paved the way for that, obviously. Mel Brooks seems like a genuine guy who built these relationships that lasted 70 years. Like, interesting if Mel Brooks ever got canceled, or Carl Reiner. See if they stuck with each other.
Yeah. Carl Reiner deletes his Instagram.
Yeah. Carl Reiner's like, no, I wasn't just the straight man and the 2,000-year-old man. I genuinely didn't understand it. That's why I kept asking all those questions.
The next clips is the producers.
Essentially, my introduction to the producers was the season of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David is playing Max Bialystock.
I was doing a show, and the producer of the show, Broadway show, said, look, they want to release, so what are we doing next? What are we doing next? Give me a title. I said, we're doing a musical called Springtime for Hitler. Tell him that. He said, I can't tell him that. I said, you tell him that. We're doing Springtime for Hitler. Well, let me see. Springtime for Hitler, if it is a show, it's probably the worst show ever in the worst possible taste. And I worked back from that. And I thought of a Broadway producer. And from there on, it was fun and easy.
I really never thought of the producers as a film that was kind of striking back against Hitler. People were like, hey, you can't satirize Hitler. And what you do is you make fun of him. You just make him seem silly. And then people are less likely to buy into his horseshit. These guys blazed a trail that we have been continuously dragging brush back over for the last 20 years or so. You hear a lot about guys like big names that turned down movies that became big. No Name playing a minor part that became Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman was going to play Franz Liebken, the crazy German with the helmet playwright. I read the script over the telephone to him, and he said, I'll do it. And I said, okay, it's a done deal. 3 months later, I hear pebbles against my window. So I open the window, it's Dustin, and he's a little drunk, and he's in the street. He said, I have great news, maybe not for you. They want me to audition opposite Anne, your wife, as Benjamin in The Graduate. I said, go to Hollywood. You're a mutt. I'm not worried. The minute they see you on film, they'll say, this is ridiculous, you know.
I'd be like, I'm actually going to play your wife's love interest and become one of the biggest stars of my generation.
Or to Get Smart. Now, how much pressure was there in the wake of all the James Bond films to come up with a parody about spies?
Mel does a terrific job answering. What a horrible question. Someone better make a parody of a spy movie. I've had it up to here with the lack of spy parodies.
A great one to satirize. They took themselves very, very, very seriously. So these spy things between the James Bond, between I Spy and A Man from U.N.C.L.E. and James Bond, we were flooded. We did it for fun. We never thought it would catch on. We invented this crazy cone of silence. the shoe phone, all of this insanity. Now it's on everywhere, you know?
Very different. But back then, TV was sort of the minor leagues, but, you know, he dabbled in both and did very well. And I also thought it was just interesting to kind of hear his mindset on things, because he says spy junk floating around in the world. And that's kind of always how he approached what topic he would take on. Like with, you know, Young Frankenstein, it was the horror genre, and with Blazing Saddles, it was Westerns. With Spaceballs, it was obviously like Star Wars and Star Trek and all that. But I feel like you don't get a lot of that now for some reason, which is odd because there's so much to parody. Parodies, there's not been a parody that resonates. I heard Matt Damon talk about this a little while back.
I heard Matt Damon actually talking about this not too long ago.
Yeah, someone clip that for me, please. On the ball, as usual. There's plenty to talk about with Mel Brooks, but I think we covered the basics, essentially. But my favorite thing that Mel Brooks ever did was season 4 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Mel Brooks seeks out Larry David to star in The Producers on Broadway. The whole plotline is he's co-starring with Ben Stiller. It results in, and if you know anything about The Producers, this is classic Larry David tying everything together. The end of the season shows that Mel Brooks wanted to make it a bomb so he could stop doing The Producers. And he's like, I know the perfect guy to derail this show. It's Larry David. If I bring in Larry David, it'll be a complete bomb. But then Larry ends up doing a great job, and so it ruins his life. And while you're watching it, you don't realize why necessarily. It's very well done. Throughout the duration of their time on the show, agrees with every point Larry David makes. So I wonder if part of that was he just wanted Mel Brooks to like him. So that's how he wrote it. Like, everything Larry says, Mel's got his back, and he's the only one. Larry has offended Ben Stiller, so Ben Stiller quit the production.
You have any complaints? I mean, how's it going for you?
I've got one tiny thing, just one small issue. I'm not happy with the toilet paper in the rehearsal hall.
You're going to get the softest, most beautiful toilet paper. You'll be so happy. You'll be hanging around the toilet every day.
Mel. You'll get me the softer rolls?
You got it.
All right.
I
Mel,
promise.
can we get to why you asked Larry to come here?
Oh, yeah, we have a little problem. Ben Stiller is gone. He is history. He has left us. He came to me and said, it's either me or Larry David. Make up your mind. You know, I went, right? Larry David, still around. He complained about some things, I don't know, minor stuff.
You're kidding. No, we're not kidding. Ben Stiller quit. You wouldn't sit in the front of a car? You couldn't move into the front of the car?
I mean, I have to move up to... We were 2 minutes away from where we were going.
They were 2 minutes away from where we were going.
Ben Stiller's birthday party. You didn't bring a present.
He said no gifts.
They always say no gift, but everybody brings a gift.
Oh, so you're at the show, you won't shake his hand.
I happen to have a small phobia about shaking people's hands who have snot on it. That's all. It's a small thing. It's a small little phobia.
And at the birthday party, everybody's saying happy birthday.
I don't like
but
the
you.
happy birthday song. I don't sing the happy birthday song.
He never sings the happy
He doesn't.
birthday song. Larry,
I don't like it either. I hate the happy birthday song. It's a trite, cliche song.
I just loved to get like viscerally angry about the happy birthday song and refer to it as a trite cliche. Like, I've had enough of the happy birthday song. That's one of my favorite seasons of Curb, and Mel Brooks is phenomenal in it. You know, no matter what Mel has done in his career, he'll really just be remembered for Curb Your Enthusiasm. We've spoken long enough. Mel Brooks, one of the true greats. As I said about Mort Saul, you can't tell the history of comedy without talking about Mel Brooks.